Criminal defense attorneys Colleen Kelley and Matthew Mangino, thank you both for being with us. Colleen, let me start with you. Victim impact statements are our opportunity to learn the most about the victim. So much is limited during the guilt phase of a trial. And I think a victim impact statements in a case like this, sentencing where you have a mandatory life sentence, this becomes the most important opportunity or portion of this part of the case.
Yes, and this is finally when the families of victims get to speak about their lost loved ones. They've been waiting for this sometimes for years, and they don't get to testify at the trial about the character or history of these family members. So it really is important.
Colleen, can you speak to that? But also, what do you think about this judge? I mean, I'm watching the way that he is taking it in, the way that he speaks to the victims when they are coming up to this podium. And I mentioned that he's been quoted in an article there locally for Foundation there about feeling like therapeutic courts are important and that people need to be supported differently by the judicial system.
You can see that. I can see in his face that he is listening, that he is feeling every single feeling that this family felt in the moment and also going through the process. And it's interesting that you said that, and you mentioned that he has been noted as mentioning the importance of that therapeutic process for victims and victims' families, because the interesting part of this sentencing is everything everyone says, while it makes everyone understand the process and the feelings that they went through, isn't going to have that much of an effect on this mandatory sentence. What the victims' families say, what the defendant may or may not say. So, frankly, this is a forum solely for these people to finally be able to express their feelings, including their feelings about the judicial system and the things that they're seeing as delays.
Yeah, Colleen, a follow-up to that, because there are some questions with whether or not victim impact statements do impact a judge. Here, yes, it's a mandatory system, so it's not sentence, so it's not going to impact the range. But what do you think about whether or not victim impact statements, when there is a range, how much it compels a judge to change how they might sentence a defendant?
They impact the sentence enormously. The things that they say, and I'm going to tell you that I see victims come in and beg for leniency. It very much affects the sentencing when there is a range, and especially when there's a large range. The judge, and any judge, not just this judge, takes those things into consideration, takes into consideration the feelings that the family has on sentencing, and also the effect. Right? A minimal effect in a certain type of case doesn't merit a larger sentence. Now, when this family talks about what they go through, this is also having an effect on the judge and certainly increasing a sentence, again, if there were a range.
Right. If it were a different type of situation, but here an aggravated murder case, mandatory life in prison without parole. But we're going to continue to watch how the sentencing plays out. Let's bring back in criminal defense attorneys Colleen Kelley and Matthew Mangino. We just watched together that victim impact statement from the sister of Karen Cope. And Colleen, there at the end, she's even asking for it. She wants to hear him repent. What did you think overall of her victim impact statements? You know, she had really no restrictions, it seemed, from this judge.
And that is good and also surprising. Some judges will cut someone off after a certain period of time, but this judge wanted to hear everything. And I do think it's interesting that she wants to hear that he's sorry. She wants to hear that he is remorseful. She wants to hear him repent. And I assume the rest of the family wants to hear something. The problem with that is that no matter what he says, they are certainly not going to be satisfied with the answer. I think families feel that it will make them feel better about the situation. And in my experience, there is nothing that anyone can say to make this better.
Matthew, talk about the length of time this judge is giving for people to express themselves there in the courtroom. Like Colleen said, there are many judges who, if they don't restrict the time, they restrict how far you can go, what all you talk about. If you start talking about things that don't have to do with the actual victims and the lives lost, there's a mention that, need to stay back on track. But Judge Skinder, not like that in this courtroom. Colleen, we are expecting to hear from the defendant. If you're his attorney, what are you telling him to say in that moment?
Well, again, that's really surprising because this is a conviction that carries a mandatory life sentence, or rather 2 convictions. And so as his attorney, frankly, almost all of the time, I'm telling him not to make a statement. I'm telling him not to make any admissions, because these are the types of cases that are almost always appealed. Of course, that is the defendant's choice. He can opt not to appeal the conviction. And yet I'm sure there are many issues, including all of the issues related to the not guilty by reason of insanity defense, that are appealable issues. If my client makes the decision to make a statement, understanding that this may affect his appeal, I am telling him or her to express genuine remorse. But frankly, sometimes there isn't. So I'm only advising a client to testify in a case like this if they actually feel a huge and genuine amount of remorse, and if they can actually express that. Because if it doesn't come off as genuine, then it can make it worse.
Heard it there. We've got experienced criminal defense attorneys weighing in on this decision, which is a big one. Let's get to our break. When we come back, let's bring in criminal defense attorneys Colleen Kelley and Matthew Mangino, see what they think. You both said he should not have spoken unless he is going to repent, going to show some remorse. And that's not the case. I mean, he got up there and said that it's hard to know what to say in a situation like this. It almost seemed like, Colleen, that he was starting to say that it's hard to believe that I even did this, but then he stopped short and left the podium, then came back to talk about inventions.
Julia, if anyone was wondering what could possibly make this horrific situation worse, you now have your answer. This is what could make it worse. Essentially, he got up there, he badmouthed the victim, he almost denied what he did. I think what he said at one point was, if in fact I did anything wrong or something similar. And this is what I was talking about before, that whatever he says, the family is not going to feel better. And in fact, this has to be filling them with absolute rage.
Colleen and Matthew, thank you so much for your analysis.